All right, so let's move on. We're going to cover our main topic today, which is actually going to be games as a service. So this is a phrase that we started hearing more a couple years ago. You know, as Destiny really rose in popularity, and games, a lot of Ubisoft games, kind of we talked about this prior, but have kind of gone to this model. Division, Rainbow Six Siege is a good one. For Honor has a year-long plan now of upgrades and things they're doing for the community, but we've had some notable comments from some large developers, Ubisoft being one of them. But Square Enix actually came out, and if you look at Square Enix and what they've done over the past few years, they were the company that let go of Hitman to IO Interactive because it only sold about 4 million copies. And then they complained that Tomb Raider didn't sell as much as they wanted it to, even though it sold 7 million copies. So I'm not quite sure what's in the water over there at Square Enix. If you're a publisher and you have a franchise like Hitman, which really isn't a tier one franchise nowadays, but it sells 4 million copies, and you think that that's poor, or Tomb Raider selling 7 million copies is poor, I don't really know what to tell you. That's kind of crazy. But so they came out essentially and said that their focus is going to be driving towards developing games that have a longer tail, or same type of thing, right? Develop into a game as a service that people will invest their time and money into over a period of time, potentially up to years. And I think we're going to start seeing this more, because if you look at something, Destiny's kind of the prime example, and Destiny 2 is doing really well. If you look at Grand Theft Auto 5, that may be one of the biggest examples as well. That had a massive release as expected for Grand Theft Auto, but it's just continued to sell. It's over 80 million copies now, which is just absurd to think about. And Grand Theft Auto Online, just, they're just steadily releasing content for it, and people keep buying it and playing it. And in fact, it's done so well for Rockstar that they canceled the planned single player content for Grand Theft Auto 5, the single player expansion that they had talked about after launch. So, which is kind of a shame in my opinion. So I don't know, how I personally feel about this. I've got a lot of thoughts, but I think let's start with just a couple questions for you, Bert, and we'll kind of go back and forth on it. So, what are your personal thoughts on games as a service, games like I just mentioned, versus what we've traditionally seen with, say, single player games, the Last of Us or Uncharted, even though they have multiplayer components, they're still looked at primarily as single player experiences. Things like Persona 5 or Hellblade, Horizon Zero Dawn, another great example, right? And games that have traditionally had single player and multiplayer, but not really as a service, right? So things like Halo and Gears and those types of games as well. So what are your thoughts, between those two? Which do you prefer, and do you have one you prefer?
Yeah, so I'll start out with the main point of I'm more of a single player person myself. I do multiplayer a bit, but on games that are designed for multiplayer stuff, like whether they have a multiplayer mode like Gears or Dying Light having a co-op mode where you can go through story. I spend most of my time gaming by myself in a single player. I like stories that are driven, whether it be RPG or third person like Tomb Raider or something that I go through. I prefer those games as a gamer overall. The biggest negative that I see with these games as a service mentality is a lot of these games don't advertise themselves as a games with a service mentality going through. A good example is Destiny. When Destiny 1 came out, this was their big game. They did say that they do have a deal for 10 years. Destiny is going to be this, but at the beginning, not many people knew if that standalone Destiny game was going to be that, and they were just going to build on that or what. And then in the future, we found out that they were developing Destiny 2. My biggest problem with it is I think that developers get pretty lazy with the launch of their game, and their game launch is not complete. Whether it be bugs, whether it be lack of content, whether it be missing modes that they initially advertised that were coming, and then when the game launches, like, oh, that's not ready, we're going to launch that later. But it's their pricing model that I have an issue with. If Destiny, when it first came out, was $40 or even $29.99, and then down the line you could buy DLC that would complete the game, whether it be story or content-based, I'd be a lot better with that. But being that we're launching this every single time for $59.99, and then their DLC, I think we did the math last time, and Destiny 1, when it first came out, was somewhere around the $120 to $140 range after you got all DLC, when you could have just waited down the line and bought the complete edition for, $60 or less than that eventually. So if they're ahead of time saying games with service, sell it like games with service, sell it cheaper, and then pay people down the road with it. My biggest problem is the lack of content when the game with service releases. So that's my quick 2 cents on a long topic that I could probably talk all day about. So
yeah, no, I think your last point there is the most valid to me, and that is that when they talk about games as a service, there has to be content to support that. I think once we finished vanilla Destiny, it just became, if you didn't want to just do the boring grind of the same strikes and missions over and over again, there really was no content. You had to wait for those expansions, and the first couple expansions for the game were really light on content as well. It wasn't until the Taken King came out the following year where it really kind of added new substantial content. So, and I think in that vein, it's it's almost MMO-like, right? Because MMOs have always faced the same problem. It's this is going to be a game you subscribe to monthly, and we're going to continually provide content, but the gaps between major content releasing for these games can sometimes be substantial, and that affects, I know it affects me, and it could be because I play so many games, but unless there's something interesting to keep you playing, then I'm not a huge fan of it personally.
Yeah, when you think of Destiny 2 that has come out, unless you saw the changes from day one on Destiny 1, Destiny 2, to me, is Destiny 1.5. I really don't think Destiny 2 is any kind of leap in technology or anything in story or graphics. I mean, it does look nicer, but it's not a massive jump to where other games have jumped in this generation. I mean, you look at a launch title to where we are today on PlayStation or Xbox One, it's completely different in graphics, technology, sound, everything, loading times. And Destiny 2 is not anything mind-blowing to me. So to me, that's another DLC almost for it, or maybe a large DLC or something. And if Destiny was sold as a subscription service like you were talking about before for the next 10 years and you're paying whatever it is, that would make more sense to me. But to me, these releases every 2 or 3 years are going to be really annoying after a while. If Destiny 3 releases the exact same way with just a nicer story or more story to it, that'll probably piss me off pretty good. So I don't know. To me, people love it. I mean, I've already seen people with 160 hours in that game, and they'll eat it up every time just because there's a little bit new content and they're still patrolling Earth.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think, I've really always enjoyed the games that have a single player campaign and a multiplayer component that's a dedicated, supported multiplayer component. We talk about the Gears, we talk about the Halos, the Battlefields, Call of Duties. I really like that model. And I'm just used to that model. I don't really have anything against games as a service in terms of the model, but it's just the content. The content has to be there. When you're playing competitive multiplayer, to me anyway, like a Halo, Gears, Call of Duty, Battlefield, every time you play is kind of something new, and they add maps and they add weapons, etc. But there's, you're always playing against new people and new strategies and dynamics. Whereas when you're playing something that's co-op or single player, it gets very repetitive. And I don't know, maybe that's something in the next few years or future, we see something where procedural generation will help with that, or, better artificial intelligence. I'm sure we'll see that evolve over the coming years where it becomes less repetitive and less static, I guess. So we'll see.
Yeah, it does seem to be that this is something that the industry is moving towards in general. I mean, we think of another example, so it doesn't seem like I'm always railing on Destiny, but Star Wars Battlefront 1. When that game first came out, I mean, the content was a joke. It still is a joke if I think about it again. But then if you think about it, Battlefront got, I think like 4 DLC packs after that. And you had to have the season pass for some, and then some were not part of the season pass. And so I guess they somewhat listened, and now Battlefront 2 is coming out. And ahead of time, they're telling you everything that's going to be coming out with DLC in the future, kind of more about the story ahead of time. So despite selling crazy numbers for the first one because of the Star Wars name on it, they kind of got away with that. But now they're selling it, and they're kind of almost taking the negative from something and turning it into a positive, which I guess is genius in a way. But we ahead of time know that we're getting a ton of DLC. It's all going to be free. And there's more story in it this time. So, but that's still kind of a games with service because you're going to be playing it for a bit of time. So, I don't know. I think the industry is moving towards that. Is the point that I'm making there.
Yeah, and so that kind of moves into the next main thought on this that we were going to touch on, and that is, with Square talking about this, the reason they're talking about it is profitability, right? And how they continue to support AAA studios with the cost of game development increasing. Some games cost over $100 million to make now. So it's getting to the point where a AAA game experience will cost as much as a AAA movie to make and produce. And so, the big question really is, how do developers continue to provide AAA experiences profitably, sorry, without designing the game to be a service. And I think there's a lot of discussion around how they do this. Some games, I don't know the financial figures, but some games will pay for themselves just because they're so good that word of mouth, they sell enough copies to where they make a profit, just without any additional content or additional things in the game that people can spend money on. I don't know, I keep going back to Horizon Zero Dawn, or, Zelda may be a good example, right? Zelda's already sold probably 5 million plus copies now, and will continue to sell, as we know. So that's going to be profitable for Nintendo, I'm sure, without really selling anything additional. But I think, I think some of the studios like Square Enix that we're talking about are looking at things like Destiny, where they can continue to release expansions, or even games, like there's a lot of games like, I'll pull one out of my hat here, like Smite, right? That's a MOBA that is free to download and play. It's more a free-to-play model where you earn things, but people spend a lot of money on that game for customization. So you buy lots of skins and things that show off in the game. And I think that's another aspect as well. You mentioned Battlefront 2, and they said there's no season pass. The DLC is going to be free, and they're spending a ton of money to make that game between the 3 development studios and the single-player campaign and the multiplayer. But it has loot crates, right? And I'm sure you'll be able to buy those loot crates with real money should you want. Now, they're not going to hugely affect gameplay, but, Star Wars fanatics, I mean, if they want a skin or a Boba Fett, or, for Darth Maul or whoever, those guys will go out of their way to spend extra money to get those. So it's an interesting question. I think we're just kind of scratching the surface here around how these studios continue to make money while putting out tens or hundreds of millions to make and support these games.
Yeah, I think, and funny enough, and not to get off topic, but that and microtransactions, I think, I'm interested to see if the industry sees it. Over time, people get sick of it, and then they have to change the model again. So, I don't know. I think people are getting really sick of microtransactions.
Yeah, I think that's where the outrage is coming from. As soon as someone hears microtransaction or loot box, right? And I think some of it's even unjustified, as we talked about before. So, right, there's no need for the hate on that game. It's just another feature in the game that is really not costing you any money or stopping you from experiencing any content. So I think we need to be a little more selective. All the community needs to be a little more selective around how we view these things. But there are other companies that do have bad models and kind of predatory models. And I heard an interesting comment the other day, again, like you said, not getting us too far off topic, but it's just a fact that some of these games, especially the free-to-play market, they're developing the games around kind of the gambling methodology, right? How they hook you and want you to continue to want to get something, and it pushes you down a path where it makes people want to spend money to get things in the game. And the funny thing about that, right, is that when something gets categorized as gambling, it then faces a whole string of legal ramifications that they have to face, right, and laws that affect those types of things. So it'll be real interesting to see if video games get to a point where some of them get classified as a gambling exercise and have to make some changes or face some legal ramifications of how they produce those. Because if you think, like, I can't go online right now legally in the U.S. and play poker for money, right? But I can go and I can turn on Fortnite and I could spend $1,000 opening up, loot llamas that may not give me anything of substance. So it's an interesting conversation. I think that we're only now getting into the beginning of this cycle. And I think it's going to be something, as you said, that evolves over time, and developers are going to have to figure out a way to walk that line.
Yep. No, completely agree. It's a good point too about gambling, because you can spend so much money. I know people that spend a ton of money on gears trying to get the best pack or the best people. Yeah. And, I guess that's gambling in a way, if you think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, you can make the argument that it's all cosmetic, right? You're not earning anything of substance back. I'm no expert. I don't know how they would categorize that, but it's going to definitely be a conversation point in the future, I think. And then just to close this one out, just being hypothetical. So, our personal thoughts on whether or not you see, because of the way the industry is moving, do you foresee a future where major franchises that we're used to playing in numbered releases or annual releases will move to more of a service, right? So, for instance, do you think we could see a Call of Duty that is not annual, but rather we get a Call of Duty that comes out, and then the following year you keep that core game, but then you just buy a $40 expansion that gives you a new campaign and new multiplayer suite. It's kind of part of that overall arching Call of Duty or overarching Call of Duty game. Battlefield or Halo or any of those big shooter titles could be treated the same way if you think about it. I don't know if we'll get to a point like that.
I think it'll depend on if we run out of wars to make games out of. I think we need a proper Vietnam game from the Call of Duty series. Battlefield did a pretty good job with it, but I don't know. There's so much money to be made, and now that you have like 3 different studios working on Call of Duty, there's who knows what they're working on right now, but they're in deep development right now on the upcoming one for 2018 of the fall. But I don't know. I could see some other stuff. I don't see Battlefield and Call of Duty doing that anytime in the near future until they run out of ideas, and they might consider doing that, because we've already started seeing a little bit of it with remasters and kind of some stuff coming back up for that. Just buy this game and then you get a remaster of this one. But I think they need to run out of ideas before they do that, personally.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to see that anytime soon. It was just an interesting kind of thought. Forza could be thought of the same way, but I think with a game like Forza, with a game like some of the sports games, people usually make the argument that, well, you can upgrade the rosters and upgrade some features, but there are kind of physics and fundamental engine changes that occur in those games as well that you can't really just change with an expansion. So there's a deeper development process there that people, I don't think of sometimes. So
I could, and now you mention it like that, I think I could see more of that in sports games. Like, that's what they should be to begin with. When we talk with Jordan all the time, he talks about the latest roster update's going to cost you $60.
Yeah,
that might be something that they consider. Maybe, I don't know. They make so much money every year with FIFA, Madden, and all those that it doesn't really make sense to do subscription. But I'd like to see what they spend in making a Madden or a FIFA, because like we've seen in NHL, I mean, you can't really tell me that this past year on some of those games that they really spent, millions and millions and millions to do almost nothing on it. I mean, there's no new engine on any of those games or anything. So
yeah,
I don't know, but I could see that becoming a subscription service. I mean, for that exact reason, we have the new teams here now. We have the newest jerseys or something. Spend $20 and get the whole new roster or something with new stadiums. I mean, that's all you need to do, but I don't know. I have to see the numbers before I can comment further on it.
Yeah, obviously the companies are doing what they do for a reason.
Yep.
All right, so we'll close that one out. I thought it would be something interesting for us to touch on here during this big cast, and I think it's going to be a growing topic, and I think we may come back to this next year, maybe as a conversation point and dedicate an entire episode to it, because I think we're just going to see this evolve as the industry evolves and grows.